Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome to Anatomy R01. And I do want to share a pretty neat fact with you guys. So as someone who has taught now at all three BCCCD campuses, and I normally teach at Moore Park. This is actually my first semester teaching at Oxnard College, is that I didn't know that until recently. I mean, this is just like really just an amazing fact to me, is that at Moore Park, for example, it's called Anatomy M01. And here it's called Anatomy R01. And at Ventura College, this is called Anatomy V01. And I didn't know until recently that the letter in front of the number designation actually corresponds to the college that is taught at. So when it says M01, that means Moore Park. V01 for Ventura. And I guess for Oxnard, I guess they couldn't call it O01 because that would be confusing. And I guess they decided not to do X01. I don't know why. I thought that would be kind of neat. So I guess they went with R01. So yeah, I found that pretty neat. So yeah. So anyways, with the way that this course is structured is that it is a hybrid online course. Hybrid synchronous online course. Yeah, there's actually several terminologies. So when we say online synchronous, that means we meet on Zoom. And when we say online asynchronous, that means it's all independent. There's also a hybrid in-person online, which is what the other anatomy section is, the Friday one. If you do want an in-person component, there's that option. So with that one, so with a hybrid in-person online, you meet part of the time in person and part of the time online. Yeah, so it is lots of terminology. So this is a hybrid synchronous online course because we do meet during the week, but you also have noticed that there's 4 hours of or depending on if you're in the late start one, 5 hours of independent coursework. This means that during those 5 hours is you'll be doing stuff that it has to be self-paced and on your own. Well, what kind of self-paced? So with this class here is that when we meet online, we're mainly going to be doing the labs together. Now, this doesn't mean that we won't cover some lecture content. So really the spirit of the course is that you ideally, and this is hard because it's on Mondays, but you watch the lectures, and then when we come to class, we kind of talk about some things, which we can still do. It's just if we meet on Mondays, then you watch the lectures on Tuesdays, which is what this is. Then we can talk about Tuesday's lecture on Wednesday, and we can talk about Thursday's lecture on the following Monday. So yeah, that's kind of how this course works. Long story short is we do the labs in class mostly, talk about some lecture content, but you watch the lectures and stuff on your own. Now, just a reminder, as far as the assessments go, is lecture and lab quizzes are done asynchronously, meaning that they're going to be open during the week from Thursday morning until Friday night. Now, lecture exams are also taken asynchronously, and they're also posted in the morning, and then they close at Thursday morning or whatever, or depending on when it's assigned, Monday morning. I'll tell you the exact time frame before each test, and then you have a 48-hour window to get that lecture exam done. Lab practicals, though, or lab exams, those are a bit different. So with those ones, they're going to be proctored in class, and you'll have a certain amount of time to answer the question. So I'll show a slide and say, identify this directional plane, identify this bone, identify this muscle. State one muscle that is antagonistic to this muscle. So it's going to be a lot more of your knowledge of being able to identify and know the and know information about the different anatomical parts. So yeah, that's kind of the overview of the course, and of course, we'll talk more about this in class. So this lecture is intended for both sections of my anatomies at Oxnard College. Is that we have one that's going to be the hybrid synchronous, and one that's the hybrid in-person class. Yeah, we'll just leave it at that. So anyways, let's go ahead and look at our first PowerPoint here. And you're probably asking, well, how should what's the best way to conduct lecture? So what's the most successful way? Well, the most successful way is to use all three learning modalities in order to reinforce the material. So what this means is that you are going to, ideally, and by learning modalities, there's three. There is kinesthetic, which is where you're doing things. There's auditory, where you're hearing things, and there's visually, when you're seeing things. Depending on your brain, you're going to gravitate toward one type of learning modality. For some people, they're very auditory learners, so they can just sit there and listen and learn. Others are visual learners, so that if they see things, then they learn. Others are kinesthetic learners, meaning that when they do things, they learn. But that's just your individual strength. Most people are strong in two or more learning modalities. But regardless, if you activate all three of those learning modalities, then you are going to be maximizing your learning: seeing, hearing, doing. So that's why I encourage you that first, before you even watch the lecture, go through the PowerPoint and read the corresponding chapters in the book. I think that's the best way. It's called pre-learning, is that you go through it, you look at the materials first to gain an understanding of it. And then when you watch the lecture, you'll already have that background knowledge so you can maximize learning. You'll see that I also posted outlines. I do recommend those. And sometimes I will even draw things on my drawing tablet to reinforce things as well. And when I do that, then it would be best for you to follow suit. And also I'll be putting notes on here as well. I'm still waiting for a fancier computer tablet thing in order to draw on the PowerPoints, but yeah, for the most part, the introductory material, there's not really many things to draw, but you'll get to see my art expertise throughout the semester, for better or worse. So anyways, anatomy, what is it? It's a study of the structure of body parts and the relationship to one another. Broad term. But if we look at the human body, and of course, this is an artist's rendition, but I don't know, people think that with the human body that there's all this space inside. And it's common to think that, because we have not, and most likely we'll never see the inside of our bodies. If we do, either you're looking at something very advanced as far as technology goes. Okay, that's one. You don't want to, you don't want to see the inside of your body in real life for obvious reasons. But things are actually pretty jam-packed in there. It's basically organized chaos. And it's really amazing to think that, following the accepted theory of evolution, is we went from single cells life forms and we evolved into this multicellular life forms comprised of billions of cells. And we'll talk about cells next lecture, but basically the cell is the smallest unit of life. We're basically a collection of something like 60 trillion cells, that's a T, trillion, just kind of stapled together using different proteins and connective tissues. But if we look here, we're seeing that one is these fibers here are called myocytes, and they're muscle fibers, specifically skeletal muscle fibers. And what they do is that their job is to contract or shorten. And when they do that, it allows us to move our bones and manipulate the environment. Okay, you can see how that could come in handy. We're also seeing here is we're seeing bones. So bones, as we'll talk about, bones are made up of tissue where there's cells called osteocytes. And what they do is that in their very, very early stages, they secrete a matrix that becomes bone. So actually bone is a combination of cells and the connective tissue that they secrete, and it hardens and turns into bone. And bone is important because it gives our body, I mean, it has many functions, but it gives our body a framework for being able to not only protect the internal organs, but also it serves as attachment sites for muscles, so we can explore the environment. So bones are basically our foundation that helps us keep our shape and is an anchoring point for movement. Now, also we see that there are two types of vessels, and no, they're not really red and blue. They're mainly just all sorts of red. And we see that these blood vessels, what they do is that they transport blood throughout the body. And that's necessary because blood is basically the food for our cells, and it's also the dumping point for waste products. Now, I know you're probably saying, well, so the same place where they get their food is the same place where they dump their waste. Yeah, okay, but it actually works out really well, trust me. So red is supposed to signify arteries, which delivers fresh blood to the cells. And blue is supposed to signify veins, which carries, I don't want to say used blood, but it carries deoxygenated blood that needs to go back to the heart and lungs in order to become reoxygenated. Oh, and this green network here, there is called the lymphatic system. And what this is it's an incredible network that collects extra fluid that just pulls into our body, and it returns it to the bloodstream. But it also is the site of the major immune system. So you're seeing here that all these work together. Is that the bones anchor the muscle and protect the organs. Blood gives energy and nutrition to the body. The lymphatic system collects extra fluid and hosts many of the immune cells, and all of this is packed in together into one organized, or like I said, it's more or less organized chaos into one functional structure. Oh, and I forgot about these things here: nerves and nerves. What they do is they do more than just detect sensation, but they send signals from our brain to our muscles called the somatic system that tells them to move. So yeah, just the human body is an amazing structure that was formed from billions of years of evolution, which in itself is incredible. All right, so anyways, that's anatomy. What is physiology? For those of you who are taking physiology concurrently with this class, I send my condolences to your social life and possibly your quality of sleep. But anyways, physiology is a lot different. Is physiology, we focus on the microscopic component of how the body works. And physiology includes a lot of chemistry, some physics, and yeah, a lot of that. But this here is the functional unit of the kidney called the nephron, which is microscopic. And what we learn about in here is that how the functional part of the kidney, the nephron, how it uses ion transport in order to move water back into the blood. We talk about things like ion channels, concentration gradients, water movement. We talk about the effects of hormones on the function of the kidneys. So yeah, we talk about lots of things involving chemistry principles, lots of things at a microscopic level, which is why the field of anatomy hasn't changed a lot in the past 20 years. The field of physiology, though, has. Okay, great. So this is physiology. We don't talk about too much physiology in this class, but we do introduce it, assuming that you're taking this class and then physiology, even though you can take them both concurrently. Yeah, so with physiology, if you do take that class, is we break things much like with anatomy, we break it into different systems. So like we talk about the skeletal system, we talk about the muscular system, nervous system. So we focus mainly on what's called the organ system, which is all the organs in the body that work together in order to complete a common task. Now with anatomy, we're going to talk about two different components of it. The first is called gross anatomy. Now, when we say the study of large structures, what we really mean is visible to the naked eye. So anything that we see is gross anatomy. It's also known as macroscopic, macro for big, so or macroscopic anatomy. So this is what we mainly focus on, but we also do quite a bit of microscopic anatomy, which is things that can only be seen with the aid of a microscope. Now, there are many different types of microscopes. At the introductory level, you use what's called a compound light microscope, which is where, well, you use light in order to help visualize the image. However, there's many more powerful microscopes that can magnify things millions of times. One of these is called the scanning electron microscope, which actually creates high detail surface images of microscopic components. Like here, we see these red blood cells are highly detailed, even though you can't see inside of them. Now, this here is what's called a transmission electron microscope. And what this does is it lets you see things as magnified as possible, but the quality is lower. So this is actually what the functional units of muscle fibers look like. And you can see why this was an amazing discovery, because now you can see more or less how things work on a physiological level as well. So yes, as far as the microscopic level, we break it down into two components: cytology, which is where we study things at the cellular level, and histology, where we focus on things at a tissue level. The difference between cytology and histology is that with cytology, we focus on the individual cell. Histology, we focus on the function and structure of the tissue. But keep in mind that a tissue is formed when cells of the same type are combined together in order to form a consistent structure. Here's an example of histology and cytology. So we see here that these are cells of the immune system. And we see here that these are all a type of cell called a lymphocyte. And what these do is that they are a large component of the immune system. And if you look at the slide here, eventually we want to get you to the point where you say, a slide where there is a bunch of immune cells, that has to be from the lymphatic tissue. Now, as far as histology goes, well, if we look here, we're seeing that there is some space in between here. And whenever there's space, it's filled with something that cannot be preserved. So for example, maybe water is supposed to be here, or maybe fat, or something is supposed to be here that has not been preserved in the slide, because there's actually a pretty extensive process of staining in order to make these slides. Excuse me. So if we look here generally, is that whenever something is stained purple, then it is going to be a structure that normally is comprised of some sort of lipid soluble material. And if it's stained pink, then it could be a different type of component, like another type of tissue. So when we see things being stained, and this is something that we unfortunately cannot do this semester unless you're in the Friday class, is we can analyze this tissue and say, well, okay, what exactly is it? And ways we can do that is by seeing what types of cells it's made up of. It's kind of harder in this case because the qualities are a little bit too low. But this image here, what it is that it is a collection of cells of the same type that are anchored together, and we'll talk about what anchor cells together next lecture. Okay, so with anatomy, we also focus on the principle of complementary structure and function. So as I said, is that this is all the product of evolution. And if you look at the teeth of wolves, for example, and the teeth of horses and the teeth of humans, you'll see that their structure is quite a bit different. And the reason why is that structure determines function. For example, the heart is a big mound of muscle. It is a big mound of muscle with space in there. And if you look at it, you'll say, well, whatever this is, it is designed to contract or squeeze things really hard. Well, okay, why would that be useful? Well, it can move a liquid through a closed system pretty efficiently. Okay, now we see here is that with teeth, is that we see here that this young lady, or I assume she's young, maybe she's not, she is eating a carrot, and they actually really zoom in on it. And you see that the way the teeth are designed is since teeth are very hard, is that she's actually biting off a piece of the carrot, and then she's actually breaking the carrot down into smaller components using the actions of her jaw, because the jaw is designed to, well, open and close. So what she's doing is that she's powerfully using her very hard teeth in order to grind down the carrot so it is small enough in order to swallow. Yes, that's probably more in detail you've ever wanted to know about the process of eating a carrot. But if you look at the teeth, is that they're perfectly suited, especially human teeth. They're suited not only for breaking down or like eating plants, but also tough animal tissue as well, which is why you're able to enjoy a steak, because even though we don't have the tearing and ripping ability of a wolf, which I don't think would enhance our social lives, we do have teeth that are perfectly suited for being okay at eating plants, but also okay at eating meats. So we can assume by the structure of our teeth that we are omnivores. That's actually how that's how like evolutionary biologists, whenever they dig up a fossilized tooth, they can figure out pretty well the dietary strategy of the animal, whether or not it was an herbivore or carnivore, by the shape of its teeth. Fun fact, the prehistoric horse actually had very sharp teeth, so we assume that the prehistoric horse was a carnivore, which, applying that to our current horse, would be horrifying if the current horse was carnivore. Just picture that. All right, so anyways, levels of structural organization. Let's go. So let's just go ahead and discount and just briefly talk about the smallest level. Is we're all comprised of atoms which form molecules. And atoms are the smallest unit of, well, matter. And matter, of course, is what makes up anything that takes up space. Molecules are combinations of one or more atoms of different types normally, or they can be the same type, but they're just combinations of atoms. Okay, now the smallest unit of life is called the cell. I do want to talk briefly about cellular organelles. No, they cannot function on their own now, but we actually think that certain organelles, like the mitochondria, were actually their own cell at one point. We think that they were very similar to bacteria, but that's not in this course. So a cell is the smallest functional unit, or the smallest unit of life. It's anything that can function or perform a task in the body. Now, tissues are made up of cells of the same type that are adhered together through certain proteins that keep cells together. Now, different tissues, when they combine together to form a functional unit, we call that an organ. So we see here with a blood vessel, we see that there's a layer of smooth muscle in the center. And on the inside, there's a layer of epithelial tissue. And on the outside, there is a layer of connective tissue. So we see that there's different types of tissues that make this functional unit, which controls blood flow throughout the body. Now, when certain organs work together to perform a common task, we say that it is the organ system level. So, for example, the cardiovascular system involves the heart, lungs, and blood vessels, and they work together for the common goal of keeping blood oxygenated and distributing it throughout the body. And then we have the organismal level, which is, well, the actual functional individual comprised of different organ systems. Okay, so that is the end of part 1, and we're going to take a quick break here. And as soon as you are ready to continue on, then unpause the video. All right, see you guys in a bit. All right, welcome back. So now we're back to learning about the different types of organ systems. And the first is the integument system, also known as the skin. So think about this as far as evolution goes. Is we have all this valuable stuff inside of our bodies, stuff that really cannot be messed with, to put it nicely. Very, very delicate. And we needed to evolve some way in order to protect the inside of the most delicate parts of our body. Plus, you have to keep in mind that we are in a world that is rife with bacteria, viruses, fungi, and other microscopic organisms. Yeah, the microscopic world is pretty terrifying. And keep in mind too that bacteria double in population every 20 to 25 minutes via binary fission, and we are literally swimming in bacteria. It is why you should wash your hands at least once every, ideally once every 2 hours at the very least, because even if you think that, well, I haven't touched anything dirty, well, okay, but the bacteria that randomly get on your hands are doubling in population every 20 to 25 minutes. That's not good, especially if you do things like touch your nose and mouth all the time, which we do. And I think we've become more conscious of that since COVID. But anyways, even though we are literally bacteria swimming pools, well, not literally, but we are covered in bacteria and all that, is inside of our bodies are sterile. Unless you are currently dealing with a pathogenic bacterial infection, there's not a single pathogenic bacteria in your body. That's how impressive the integument system is. So what this does is it provides a barrier between the environment and the internal environment and the internal I'll just put down and the internal system. So fancy way of saying that it protects us from things getting into our body. And many people are surprised that environments like hospitals, for example, even though they're incredibly sterile, it's still very common for people to get infections from surgery. And that's because that just shows you how powerful the integument system is from keeping out microorganisms. Is that even hospitals, one of the environments that's most conscious about sterilization, they still spread bacteria and other diseases. So yeah, that's the job of the integument system. That's also why if you get a cut, you're more or less breaking the boundary that keeps out the microorganisms. That's why you wash the cut well, and then you put a covering over it. I actually like that new skin stuff that you put over the wounds, because what that does is it forms a barrier that kind of functions like skin as the skin heals, or I should say regenerates via mitosis. Okay, so that is one thing of the integument system. It also provides physical protection against abrasion and chemicals. So think about all the things that you encounter in the environment. Your skin is constantly being scraped. Well, okay, assuming that you aren't wearing a jacket or another thick covering, is that your skin is constantly being scraped, it's constantly being pushed against, it's constantly being cut, it's constantly being exposed to chemicals. So the great thing about our skin is that it's actually dead. And I know you're saying like, huh? Well, okay, only the outside of the skin is dead. It's a type of tissue called non-keratinized stratified epithelium. So yeah, when we talk about the epithelial system, you'll kind of learn more. But basically, what happens is that the very bottom layers of our skin are alive, and as the cells begin to develop, eventually they're more or less drained of fluid and filled with protein. Well, I should say the cells synthesize their own protein, but still. And that's why the very top layer of our skin does not really have a blood supply, because it doesn't need to. The cells are dead. So you can't kill what's already dead. And that's why, let's say that you, I don't know, spill a chemical, spill some Lysol or whatever on your skin. The reason why you don't start to scream in pain is because even though Lysol is a pretty powerful chemical as far as breaking down or organic matter, it's not affecting the top layer of your skin, because it's doesn't have anything to hurt. So that is the great thing about the integument system, is the very outside layer is dead. So if it encounters anything corrosive, it's not going to feel it. Now that's also why if you put alcohol on a cut, it's going to hurt bad. And that's because what alcohol does is it kills cells. That's why it's so great at killing bacteria and viruses. But it also kills our cells too. And when you have a cut, is that you're exposing the environment where there's living cells. And that pain is because you're killing those cells, to put it nicely. But it actually has no effect on the outside of our skin, because there's nothing to hurt. Yeah, that's also why your skin is constantly flaking off. And it's because it's dead. It eventually just gets worn out and then just detaches from the body. We call that dandruff, things like that. Fun fact: most of the dust in your house and car is caused by skin flakes that have been broken down through the actions of things that eat it. So yeah, fun fact for you. Also, it synthesizes vitamin D, which is a hormone. And I know you're saying, wait a second, what's a vitamin and what's a hormone? Well, some of you already know. Well, a vitamin is something that our body needs in order to synthesize other compounds. A hormone is a signal molecule. We talk about that a lot in physiology. A signal molecule that tells cells to do something. And vitamin D is incredibly important to the functioning of several systems in the body, including the immune system. In fact, almost many immune cells in the body actually respond to vitamin D, which is why there's been lots of correlation between vitamin D levels and recovery outcomes to COVID. They actually think that people with lower vitamin D levels actually are more prone to severe respiratory infections. So if you haven't already had your vitamin D levels checked, I suggest you do. I'm very low on vitamin D because I go outside to go from the building to the car to the building, and then vice versa. So I actually take a lot of vitamin D in order to keep my levels normal. The skeletal system, what this does is that it actually, and I don't want to go in like amazing detail with all of these because we'll be talking about them more. But the skeletal system, what this does is it provides support and structure for internal organs. So in other words, it gives us a solid structure in order to attach things to and to protect things. So if we look at the skeletal muscles, for example, they originate at one bone and insert at another. And also what this does is it is a calcium and mineral storage. So what this does is calcium and certain other minerals are integral for bone structure. But also, well, I should say more reservoir. And I'm not sure if I'm spelling this right. Despite being an English major, my spelling could be improved. Yeah. So even though calcium and other minerals are important for bone strength, calcium is also integral for several physiological systems in our bodies. So many people don't know calcium is actually needed for muscle contraction. Just to give you one example of it, it's also heavily involved in the nervous system. So if you don't have enough calcium in your blood and body, you can't survive. So that is why it's very important that you get proper calcium in your diet, because if you don't, then your body will begin to break down bone in order to release that calcium into your body. So it actually stores calcium, and in times where our body needs it, it will actually break it down from our bones and put it back into our bloodstream. Now, so those are the main functions of bones. Oh, also it protects, or actually I should say encases internal organs. So for example, bones actually provide protection to very vulnerable structures in our body. For example, the skull encases the brain and allows it to maintain a isolated internal environment. The spinal cord encases the spinal cord. I should say the vertebra. What they are is they are strong bony structures that protect the nerve cord from physical trauma. Excuse me. So those are a couple things with the skeletal system. Muscular system, what this does is it allows us to manipulate bones to explore the environment. So it is responsible for, fancy term for locomotion. It allows us to move our bones in order to explore the environment. And it also allows us to move, lift, and perform tasks. So for example, this allows you to do things like, oh, okay, I need to pick up this rock in order to, I don't know, go into a cave. I don't know. But it allows us to perform tasks as well. And also it generates heat. Very, very important in case that you ever find yourself in a cold environment, which if you live in California, there hasn't been a cold environment here in probably a couple decades. I kid, but I'm not too far off. So what this does is that when you are cold, you probably find you start to shiver. Well, that's a reflex in response to your body temperature falling. And because we are endothermic life forms, meaning that we generate our own heat, and muscles, when they do activity, they generate heat. Then moving muscles allows us to generate more heat, which allows us to stay warmer. That's also why when it's really hot, you feel lazier, because your body's trying to tell you, don't use your muscles as much because we don't want to generate any more heat. Okay, so next we have the nervous system. And the nervous system is comprised of the brain and the spinal cord and the attaching nerve fibers. And what this does is it allows us to process sensory information and determine a voluntary or involuntary response. So to give you an example, is that we have different sensory organs in our body. Our eyes see, our ears hear, our tongue tastes, our nose smells, and our integument feels. So what this does is that our brain is constantly receiving sensory information, and it needs to decide an action. So you're watching this lecture right now. You're interpreting the information that you're hearing and you're seeing. And what you are doing is you are actually deciding to write it down. So that is the response. Now, because this information is so scintillating, is you're probably feeling excitement too. You're probably feeling happiness and a sense of wonderment. So that is going to be more of an involuntary response, because you just can't help yourself to feel just thrilled on the edge of your seat with this. So the brain processes sensory information and decides how to move muscles or the certain neurotransmitters to release in order to decide the best response. So for example, let's say you're walking down the street and you see a grizzly bear. All right, well, what's going to happen is that the sensory information is going to go to your brain, and you're going to compare the grizzly bear to what you know about grizzly bears. And yes, that it can mess you up pretty bad. So what you are going to do is that your brain is going to activate a system called the sympathetic nervous system. And what that's going to do is it's going to cause a fight or flight reaction. Excuse me. And then you have to decide whether to run from the bear or fight it. I don't suggest the fighting or the running part, but I mean, if you do encounter a bear on the street randomly, your choices are limited. And yeah, so that's an example of how the nervous system works. But also, and many people don't really know this, but it also controls conscious muscle movements. Researchers still aren't entirely sure why we can think and then move. So we don't exactly know why we have conscious control over our muscles. Why is it that we can just decide to move our finger and we do? It's pretty amazing if you think about it. But all these nerves here, what they do is that they terminate right on top of a muscle fiber or group of muscle fibers. Whenever you decide to do something, the signal goes from your brain down your spinal cord to the peripheral nerves, and it activates a certain muscle and it activates what's called a twitch, which is a single muscle contraction. So it's also the same with your smooth muscle as well. For example, the actions of your stomach, the actions of your intestines, the actions of your liver, all that's controlled by the brain, either consciously or subconsciously. Now, the endocrine system controls growth and development of the organism. So for those of you with kids, you probably know that they start off super small, and then they begin to grow, and then they develop into teenagers, and then adults, and you're like, oh my gosh, how did this happen? Well, you can thank the endocrine system for that. But anyways, what this does is the endocrine system was once called the ductless gland system. Now it's called the endocrine system. And what it does is it secretes hormones, which are, so let me try this, comprised of hormones. And hormones are signal molecules that travel through the blood, meaning that they can affect almost multiple organ systems because the blood goes to every single cell. So to give you an example, the thyroid gland secretes thyroid hormone, which controls the metabolic activity of the cells. Testosterone controls muscle growth, development, feelings of aggression. Estrogen controls things like the female secondary sex characteristics, and it also controls things as well. For example, it actually helps to have an effect where it actually retains water partially, and also controls things like fat distribution. And believe it or not, and I know that many people don't know this as well, is that both men and women secrete testosterone and estrogen, just in different amounts. So for men, they're testosterone dominant. For women, they're estrogen dominant. But we do secrete both because they're both needed as far as several vital processes in our bodies. Yeah, in fact, yeah, so that's something that is a common misconception, is that men secrete testosterone only, women secrete estrogen only. No, that is not the case. We secrete both, just in different quantities. Okay, and also, yeah, so if you just want to see the power of the endocrine system, if you're deficient in one endocrine hormone, so for example, let's say you're hypothyroid, is you see the list of symptoms, if you want to research that, are incredibly long. And that's because thyroid hormone is needed by basically every cell in the body. Cardiovascular system, the job of it is simple. It is simple yet incredibly effective. And the job of the cardiovascular system is to circulate blood throughout the body. Now, we have this substance called blood. It contains everything that cells need to live. Now, how do we get it to those cells? Well, easy. We'll just circulate it. Okay, but how do we circulate it? Well, there wasn't machinery back a couple 100 million years ago. So we had to do it out of organic molecules, functional proteins that contract. Okay, great. So you have this structure that contracts so hard that it can push blood throughout an entire network of vessels. And we call this the cardiovascular system. So the job is to circulate blood throughout the body. And this is important because blood contains nutrients needed for cell survival. Not to be morbid, but that's also why when people go into cardiac failure, death comes soon after, because cells cannot go long without oxygen and nutrients. And also waste products generated from the cell begin to build up. And the brain especially does not like being deprived of oxygen or nutrients for very long, which is why people, if they have poor blood supply due to hypotension, is they actually can have too low of circulation and actually lose consciousness. I jokingly compare the cardiovascular system to the brain to the Sega Game Gear. Many of you have no clue what I'm talking about, but the Game Gear was a handheld system that back in the 90s, it ran on 6 AA batteries and it had a span of an hour, meaning that if you were really invested in a game and you were playing it for 4 hours, well, I'm no math magician, but that's like 24 AA batteries. So that's why, thankfully, they came out with battery packs for it, which basically turned your system into, it kind of felt like you were holding an entire console, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, awesome. So now we're going to go on to the lymphatic system. Now this is kind of interesting to say. This is rather complex, but the lymphatic system is a separate network of fibers or vessels. Now, what happens is that constantly is that your blood vessels, especially the microscopic ones called the capillaries, is they're constantly losing just a little bit of fluid constantly. And what happens is that this fluid drains in a system called the lymphatic system, which is going to eventually return it to the blood. Now, what's also interesting is that when fat is digested, it actually travels through the lymphatic system, not the blood, unlike the other nutrients which travel into the blood. So what this does is that it collects excess H2O, or I'll just say fluid, and returns it to the blood. Now, also, what this does is it is going to, furthermore, it is also the site of, well, actually, location of lymphocytes, which comprise the, gosh, why am I thinking? Oh, the acquired immune system. So what happens is that if you do have a bacterial or viral infection, eventually these structures are going to be washed into the lymphatic system and go into your lymph nodes, where an entire troop of immune cells will be waiting for them. It's more complex than that, of course, but that's just the basics of it. Okay, next, the respiratory system. And what this is that it is involved in oxygenating blood. And also it is responsible for eliminating CO2. So yeah, very simple. What happens is that we constantly need to inhale like atmospheric air, because our blood needs to be constantly oxygenated. Our blood cells need to be carrying as much oxygen as possible. And the reason why this is that cells need oxygen in order to perform a process called cellular respiration, where they make energy to function. Now, a byproduct of cellular respiration is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is not really functional for the body. In fact, it's really not wanted in large quantities, because since carbon dioxide is polar, excuse me, and water is polar, they respond to react, and they make a weak acid called carbonic acid. Actually, why the oceans are turning more acidic, because since we're putting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, it's reacting with water more, and it's making water bodies more acidic, which is kind of scary. Yeah, people ask, what is the greatest threat to the Earth? Well, the greatest threat is the one that we don't talk about, and that through human activities, you're actually destroying the oceanic ecosystems, which will eventually result in the downfall of life itself. It's complicated but scary. What the digestive system does is it breaks down organic molecules into basic building blocks called macromolecules, and there's four basically. There's amino acids, which make proteins. There's there's glucose, which makes up carbohydrates. There's DNA, which makes up nucleic acids, which makes up DNA, and then fatty acids, which makes up fat. So when these are broken down into their basic blocks, they're able to be absorbed into the blood. So absorbed into blood, lymph, and distributed to cells. So that's why, for example, if you say, hey, I'm feeling tired, I'm feeling low on energy, I'm going to go ahead and have a piece of bread. Okay, so what happens is that bread is going to be broken down in your digestive system. It's going to be broken down into its simplest building block, which is glucose, absorbed into your blood, and then your cells can use the glucose for cellular respiration. Yeah, and it also eliminates wastes. Actually, and this is just a PSA for you all, is eat your fiber. And that's because the functions of the digestive system is it moves things by squeezing. And since fiber adds bulk to your food, what happens is that it is poorly absorbed by the digestive system. So what happens is that it gives bulk to what's going to end up being your waste. And since the large intestines works by squeezing, you see that the large intestines has these individual, looks like compartments called hostra. What they do is that each hostra, it basically massages the waste through your through the large intestines. And the more bulk there is, then the easier it is to massage it. Like think about it. Is it easier to squeeze a baseball or a marble? So if you don't have enough fiber, what's going to happen is that your large intestines is being forced to massage something that doesn't have much mass, and it's going to be hard to move, causes constipation. So eat your fiber, everyone. One of my friends asked me yesterday when we were working out, because when two people work out together, it's bro time. Yeah. So anyways, he asked me, he's like, I'm just curious, is it normal for a 33-year-old man to be having bowel movements multiple times a day? Now he didn't say bowel movements. He said another word that I'm sure you can guess. And I said, well, okay, is it consistent? And he said, yes. And I said, is it coming out of solid logs? Yes. And I said, then you got nothing to worry about. You have a healthy system. But yeah, when I talked to him about his diet, he eats a high fiber diet, and I said, hey, that's good. Keep it up. I have some other funny stories with the digestive system, but we'll wait on that. All right, but anyways, the urinary system is extremely important. I cannot talk enough about the urinary system, also known as the renal system. Yeah, lots of stuff to talk about, but basically what it does is it eliminates toxins and excess quantities of chemical compounds. Many of you might notice after taking your multivitamin for the day, you may notice that your next urinary event, the urine is very yellow and has very smelly. And that's because when you take this large dose of vitamins, your body doesn't need it all. So the renal system decides to just get rid of it. So yes, that's why it leads to very expensive urine. Also maintains water balance. Well, I mean, it's more than that, but what it does is it makes sure that there's enough water in your blood in order to maintain proper blood pressure. And proper blood pressure. The renal system does more than that, but that's just the basics. All right, male reproductive system. What it does is it produces sperm, and the female reproductive system produces oocytes, also known as eggs, and provides environment for developing organism. Yeah, so the female reproductive system is not only the site fertilization, but also provides space in order for and an environment in order for the embryo to eventually develop into a fetus and then as a functional organism. All right, so those are the major body systems. If you need another break, I encourage you to take one. So this just shows us exactly how the different body systems work together. So this is just a very simple diagram, but we see that the heart circulates blood throughout the body. Okay, well that's great and all, but the lungs serve to oxygenate the blood in order to ensure that our cells get enough oxygen and that carbon dioxide is eliminated through the body. While that's going, because cells, they're constantly dumping waste products into the blood, is that the urinary system eliminates those waste products and excess amounts of things. We also see that what puts nutrients into the blood is the digestive system, and that's just one way that the systems work together to make nutrient-rich, oxygen-rich blood that is constantly filtered from wastes. Okay, next we're going to get into the different anatomical positions. So more or less, when we look at like an anatomical structures, is how do we interpret it? Well, what we do is that we always assume that we are looking directly at the structure. Everything's going to be a mirror image. So this is normal anatomical position. Nobody stands like this. But what you are doing is that you are standing up straight, hands at the sides, palms forward, feet together. If the person is laying down, they are either going to lay down flat, which is supine, face up, or prone, face down. Now, we also have directional terms when we talk about body parts in relation to each other. And we'll get to that shortly. But anyways, everything you look at here is a mirror image. So even though this is to our right, this is the left hand. Even though this is to our left, this is the right hand. Everything is a mirror image. Oh, excuse me. Allergies in the morning are no fun. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about these directional terms. You will need to identify examples of these on your quiz and exam. Now, when we say that something is superior, it does not mean better. It means above. So whenever we say superior, it means that it is closer to the cranium. So for example, we can say the head is superior to the abdomen. That is one example. So superior means that it is closer to the cranium. We also can apply it to individual structures as well, but generally I keep it as far as to keep it simple. I keep it more toward the organismal level. So I'll say something like, all right, well, the stomach is superior to the small intestines. Thus, the large intestines is inferior to the heart. Now, inferior means away from the head. So as I was saying before, is that the pelvic bone is inferior to the ribs, meaning that it's further from the head. Or you can say that the esophagus is inferior to the brain. So inferior just means below. Here's an example here. The navel is inferior to the chin. True. When we say anterior or ventral, this means that it is toward the front of the body. So for example, the trachea is actually anterior or ventral to the esophagus. Or in this example here, the breastbone is anterior to the spine. So this just means more toward the front. And there's also a note here that in bipedals, which is humans, is that anterior and ventral can be interchanged. But in quadrupedals, that's not the case. But in this class, we don't focus on that. Posterior is toward the back of the person. So the spinal cord is going to be posterior to the sternum, meaning that it's further to the back of the person. So we'll be going over some more examples of these in class, but this is just an overview. Now, when we say something is medial, it's toward the midline of the body. So if you look here, if we say like, okay, you probably know that if you know a bit about the body, you know the 4 ligaments of the knee, and we know that there's the anterior cruciate ligament because it's closer to the front of the body, the posterior cruciate ligament because it's closer to the back of the body, the medial collateral ligament because it's closer to the midline of the body, and the lateral collateral ligament because it's closer to the outside of the body. In fact, let me go ahead and show you and just because this is a perfect representation, well, not perfect, but it is a representation of the different directional terms that we've been talking about. So I'm going to look up ligaments of the knee. Let me find you a nice 3-dimensional one. Let me put down 3-dimensional. Sorry, guys, just bear with me for a moment. Okay, there's not really much I can find on here that doesn't involve paying money. But let me look here. No, that's not good. Okay, I was kind of hoping just to see the ligaments of the knee. But give me one more moment. Okay. Oh, this one can work. Okay, so this is good enough, I guess. All right, so if we look here, is that these are the major ligaments of the knee. We see here the one that is in front is called the anterior cruciate ligament. And that's because compared to this one behind it, the posterior cruciate ligament is the anterior one is closer to the front of the body. The posterior cruciate ligament sits behind it, so it sits closer to the back of the body. The lateral collateral ligament, this is on the outside of your leg. The medial collateral ligament is on the inside of your leg, meaning that it's facing more toward the midline of the body. So using these directional orientations is you should know, okay, the medial collateral ligament is going to be closer to the midline, lateral collateral ligament is going to be further from the midline. Anterior cruciate ligament is going to be more anterior, and the posterior cruciate ligament is going to be more posterior. So this is just a good example of how we use directional orientation in terms of things like the structure of the knee. Cool. So going back here, lateral is away from the midline of the body. So the heart is medial to the arm, but the arms are lateral to the chest. We can use the same thing with the lungs. The lungs are medial to the arms. We don't talk much about intermediate. This just means that it is between a medial and lateral structure. I don't use this example on exams because I think it's a little bit too hard to word. Next is proximal. So when we say proximal, this means that it is closer to the origin of the body. So one example here is that the elbow is proximal to the wrist, because it's going to be closer to the point of origin. And I know that's kind of confusing, but we use this term well for muscles. Is we have for muscles we have an origin where it starts from and an insertion where it ends. So we can say that, for example, I don't know, gosh, I'm blinking on the name of it, but I'll just say the biceps brachii, they are more proximal to the sternum, then to the then to the lower arm. I know that's a terrible example. For whatever reason, I'm blanking on it, but it's closer to the origin of the body. Again, it's kind of hard to put examples of this on the quizzes and exams. So what I'll probably just do is ask you for the definition. And distal is going to be away from the origin of the body, which again, I'll probably ask you more of the definition, not an example. Superficial, though, is closer to the body surface. And this is a pretty, and this is one where we can use lots of examples. We can say, like, for example, that the sternum is superficial to the heart, or the adipose tissue is superficial to the skeletal muscle tissue. Deep is going to be more internal, so more toward the middle of the body. So we can say the heart is deep to the sternum, or the spinal cord is deep to the integument system. So this is away from the surface of the body. All right, so these are the major directional terms. And now we're going to move on to briefly about the body regions. When we say that something is axial, this is what we commonly refer to as the torso of the body. And axial includes the head, neck, and trunk. When we say that things are perpendicular, these are things that attach to the torso, which is the upper and lower limbs. And also, as we go through this class, you'll start to see common terminology. So whenever you see something like carpal, it's going to refer to wrist. Whenever you see something like brachialis or brachium, it's going to refer to arm. So these are things we'll talk about more as we get through class, and this is why lab is going to be so important for us. Planes of reference. So we actually can divide the body into different planes. And this is actually really important when we start to talk about things like imaging techniques, CT scans, MRI scans, and things like observing different anatomical structures and different organs, and also with histology too, as we can look at things like a sagittal cut or a coronal cut. But when we say coronal, what this is doing is it is separating the person by from the anterior and posterior portions. So you're pretty much cutting the person. So you're separating the anterior and posterior parts of their body. So we call this the frontal or coronal plane. The sagittal plane, what we're doing is that we're basically going to divide them into left and right hemispheres. So when we say that something is sagittal, is it's like you're cutting them into two symmetrical halves and looking at the inside of their body. Now, when we say that something is transverse, what we're doing is that we are separating their upper body from their lower body and looking into the cut structure. So to give you an example here, is that if we are going to look at the sagittal plane, is that it's more or less you're cutting the person into two separate left and right halves. So what you are doing is that you are cutting them down the middle, so you have two symmetrical halves. And if we look at it through an MRI, you'll see this image. It's like you're looking into the side of the person. It's like you're cutting them in half and then looking at their side. Now, the frontal plane, this is the one that you'll be most familiar with in this class, is you are separating them from anterior and posterior. So it's like you are looking directly at the front or back of the person. And this is an example of an MRI or CT scan that is from the coronal plane. Next is the transverse plane, where you separate the upper and lower halves of their body. And you see here is that what you're doing is that you're pretty much looking into the transverse plane of the torso. And we can see here the liver, the aorta, the pancreas, the spleen, the spinal cord. So this also gives a lot of valuable information, especially when trying to look at the valves of the heart, because it's one of the only planes where you can visualize all four valves. So as you can see, this really allows you to see the very deep structures of the body well. So it's important, especially if you decide that you're going to go into radiology, that you understand the three different planes and how to interpret them. Because what the idea is that certain things in the body can only be seen well from a certain plane. And the plane that the image is taken from is the one that generally provides the most detail. And we'll be going into more about magnetic resonance imaging and CT scans later on in the course. And next is that we have, and going back in the views, is here we have the sagittal view here of the body cavities. And this is going to be the coronal view of the body cavities. And body cavities, what these are is that they are closed environments which contain certain organs or structures. The thoracic cavity contains the heart and the lungs. We're not going to focus on the different cavities within the thoracic cavity, but just know that it is further subdivided. Excuse me. Cranial cavity is a closed environment that contains the brain and the surrounding fluid. The vertebral cavity contains the spinal cord, also a closed environment. The abdominal pelvic cavity contains the digestive organs. Excuse me. And the pelvic cavity contains the urinary structures and reproductive structures. All right, so these are the major cavities of the body, and I hope you all enjoyed this lecture, and I'll see you all in class.